I go and explain to the sergeant what's going on. And he's like, "Are you drunk?"
Oh, good.
I look at him, I said, "Yeah." I said, "But I can still see." And I said, "Oh, by the way, you should bring a couple extra guys with you." I walk in, followed by a sergeant and 3 cops. Bartender I had known, and he's like, "What's going on?" I just, put my fingers across my lips, don't say anything. By this time, it's 3 deep at the bar. And I walk up behind Richard Friedlander, and I go like this, point my finger at him. And the sergeant walks up to him and says, "Are you Richard Friedlander?" He said, "Yes, I am." And the sergeant says, "Well, you're under arrest." Guess what happened next?
What's up, everybody? We are back. We are back with another episode of Police Off the Cuff. My name is Mark DeMeo. My co-host here, Bill Cannon. What's up, Bill? How are you?
Doing good, man. I'm always looking forward to every Monday where we do this show.
I know. Doesn't it seem to go quick now?
It sure does.
Within a blink of an eye.
I
We're
got people contacting me all the time when I come on the show, too.
That's great. And let me tell you something. You're doing a great job with the guests. That seems to have fallen into your lap. I'm out there doing the hustling, the promoting mostly. That's what I do on my end. But I think it's really coming together, and I'm very, very happy about this. And I'm so happy about today's episode because in my vision, I wanted to start out and bring in the best of the best law enforcement officers that we had here. In New York City, that's where we started, but I wanted to expand it to other states. And I also wanted to broaden out the show to everything that has to do with law enforcement. And that's why I'm really, really pleased to have our first guest here today. I mean, not our first guest, but our guest here today. And I'm gonna let you introduce him, Bill, because I know you're a big fan, so...
All right, today we have he's not a law enforcement officer, but he was a Manhattan DA for 24 years. He came on the Manhattan DA's office in 1982 when New York City was rocking, especially Manhattan. And he did 24 years in the DA's office, and now he's actually a defense attorney. So we don't have to hate him because he did have a prior life as a prosecutor. But
he flipped.
Yeah, he flipped. He flipped the switch.
Everybody's got to try and keep somebody out of jail.
What's up, Dan? How are you?
I'm doing well, gentlemen. How are you?
Dan Bibb in the house.
We may even need an attorney one day.
What do you think about the palatial estates here?
Yeah, it's a beautiful place.
I heard you commenting. You like it?
Yeah, he's got the pool out back. I'm thinking this may be my vacation spot
in the summer,
this
we're going
year.
to do the podcast poolside.
I just have to do a short commercial. These premises are protected by Smith & Wesson, Glock, and Tommy Kennedy, the toughest cop in New York City. He patrols 2 nights a week, and Ralph Friedman sells his books in my driveway on the weekend. So in case you're trying to think of doing something here, don't.
Well, I can bring a Remington into that equation.
Good. That's good.
Hey, Dan, let me ask you, you were a district attorney. Where did you grow up?
Well, I was born in Chicago, involuntarily moved to New Jersey when I was just about 9. Spent the rest of my life in Jersey except for college. And then when I went to the DA's office, obviously moved into the city for a while.
So you can do that. You can be... you can go to law school, graduate. You went to which school did you go to?
Well, they call it the Harvard of New Jersey. It's Seton Hall University Law School. I've actually lectured at Harvard, and I've opened with that. I said I didn't go to the Harvard. I went to the Seton Hall, the Harvard of New Jersey.
Did the Harvard people get that joke? Did they laugh or what?
They laughed.
That's good. Seton Hall's Catholic, right?
It is.
So you're a good Catholic boy?
Spent every year of my educational career in Catholic schools except for 2 years of high school.
Wow. You got a nickel for an old altar boy father?
Altar boy myself. I always loved doing the weddings and the funerals because that got you paid.
That's right. You get tipped.
Yeah. I went to Catholic school my whole life, too.
My mother tried to make me become an altar boy, and I pretended I was retarded, that I couldn't learn when to ring the bells and shit because I didn't want to do it.
I did it. I liked it. We had fun. We had too much fun. I actually got kicked off for
I love the bells. I was such a good Catholic boy, I would volunteer to do a couple of masses every Sunday.
Holy shit.
Yeah.
Yeah, but then things change.
You met some of those pedophile priests.
There's a scene in a movie, I'm trying to think of what it is, where the altar boy, he's putting the Eucharist, or the priest is putting the Eucharist in the girl's mouth, and he had a crush on that girl. Do you remember what movie that was? Pretty sexy. It's,
No idea.
Yeah, I remember that. I remember that serving communion with the priest, and like there was a couple of cute chicks, and you're standing there. You look good because you got to do your hair on Sundays. You put on that robe.
I have a question. Any of us three go to mass anymore? Oh my God! There's some bad Catholics here.
I got baptized Greek Orthodox.
I don't call it a bad Catholic. I call it a lapsed Catholic.
Me too. I
think, yeah, man. I don't know. It's tough to keep me in there, man. I had a hard time with it when I was a child. It's just sitting still. That's why I didn't mind being on the altar boys because it gave you something to do.
Yeah.
And then I got married to a Greek girl. And I got baptized Greek, and we started going to Greek church. And let me tell you something. Catholic church, you can come in 15 minutes late. You can leave right after communion. So the whole thing really, and you don't have to really get dressed up. So the whole thing really lasts like half hour. You go to Greek church, they don't start until you get there. They wait for you. And as soon as you walk in, that's when they start. And then it's like a 3-hour thing. You finish like a half a pack of cigarettes. If you go out every 10 minutes to have a cigarette, and you come back, it's like a 3-hour thing.
You guys throwing the plates into the fireplace too?
No, there's no plates at the church. Come on, man.
That's the only thing I know of Greek culture. So give me a break, all right?
So you grew up in New Jersey.
I did.
And you went to Seton Hall. You're a tall dude, man. You got me beat. This is like the first time I ever had somebody.
You play high school basketball then?
No, I was a swimmer.
Swimmer.
Yeah, man. Well, that's cool though. You
must have some kick.
You get to the wall quicker. Yeah, but isn't Phelps? Who was it? Michael Phelps. He's pretty tall too. He's like 6'7". What are you? 6'7"?
6'6". I could never swim in college, man. There were just too many more fun things to do than practice.
Can you dunk?
Be in a pool 3 hours a day. 80 pounds lighter.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I could. Yeah. Two-handed.
Wow.
But,
two-handed?
Now I doubt I could even touch the rim.
I know, isn't that funny? When I was in high school, I could dunk. I'm 6'1". I could jump.
Couldn't dunk, man.
Now
I'm 6'4".
I'd be lucky if I could touch the backboard.
My coach used to say to me, "You run like you hate the earth."
Well, I can still touch the backboard standing still, but my jump is maybe about 3 inches.
3 inch vertical jump.
Yeah, I could get above the rim, but then I couldn't grip the ball. Yeah. So the ball, if the ball came out and happened to fall in the basket, then it looked like I dunked.
You counted that as a dunk?
It looked like I dunked it. And the worst was in the beginning of the games, when you do the layup drills?
Yeah.
And, the girls would come, they're in the stands, they're watching, and all the other kids were dunking. And here I am, one of the centers on the team, and I would just do a layup. So fucking embarrassing. So
actually, the DA's office had an extremely competitive league.
That's right.
Extreme, like hyper competitive. Like
John Irwin played for Georgetown, right?
I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of those lawyers played on the basketball teams in their colleges.
They did. John Irwin went to played at Georgetown. He was the last white guy to play at Georgetown.
If I didn't have this cheesy beard I have now, you could see a nice scar where I got 7 stitches after one of those games. So,
wow,
it was not unknown that there was blood on the floor during one of those games.
Where'd you guys play?
Irving Place, right?
Washington Irving High School.
That's right, because I used to 10 bar at Pete's.
Go right around the corner to Pete's after every game.
That's right.
Yeah, that's a good thing, man. That's one of the cool things about living in the city. When you get to be like either in the DA squad, you get a special place to play your basketball games. If you're an actor or a comedian, you get in the softball league in Central Park. You can play your softball games in Central Park. It's one of the cool things about being in New York City.
You always knew who the good guys were because you could beat the shit out of each other on a basketball court, and 10 minutes after the game's over, you could be laughing and having a beer together.
And
there's one guy who would never join us at Pete, and that's our present governor.
Oh, God. But he only did like a year and a half as a DA, though, right?
He did 2.5 years.
2.5 years.
You were supposed to do 3. He cut out at 2.5. Supposedly, he had the boss's permission. The boss, of course, being Robert Morgenthau, to go run Daddy's campaign.
When you say he was supposed to do 3, that means when you're trying to tell us that when you sign on to get the job in the DA's office, you're pretty much signing on to do 3 years. Is that in the contract or? No,
there's no contract. There's no written contract. But when you're offered the job, you're asked to make a 3-year commitment. And although nobody's going to put a gun to your head and say you got to stay for 2 years, 366 days. It's expected that you are going to fulfill your commitment. And people who don't usually don't get the recommendations that people would normally get after fulfilling their commitment from other higher ups.
So it's
in the
almost like the
office.
police department resigning with the permission of the police commissioner or not, right?
There were very few people that I know that didn't fulfill their commitment. A couple, Andy being one of them, I think. At least he says he had his permission, had Mr. Morgenthau's permission to leave before 3. But you were expected to fulfill your commitment.
Right.
And of course, I had worked for a federal judge for a semester in law school, and he and Mr. Morgenthau were friends. And when I took the job, he looked at me and said, I know people like you. You're not going to do 3 years. You're going to do a career. And I said, Judge, I think you're wrong. I said, I think I'm, going to do 3 or 4 years, then, go out and make some money. And about 20 some odd years later, I saw him at a Seton Hall law school event, and he actually recognized me. And he said, "So you're working for some big law firm?" And I said, I laughed. I laughed, and I said, "No, Judge, you made an accurate prediction back then. I'm on my 20th year." He goes, "Yeah, see, I told you so."
What was it about you? What was it about you? What did you have that? Is it the passion for to put people away? Is that what he saw in you?
What Morgenthau saw in me?
Well, who said that to you?
That was Judge Curtis Meaner.
Okay, that you were going to make a career out of it. But he meant you made a prosecutor career out of it.
He
right?
meant that I was going to have so much fun doing what I did that I wasn't going to leave.
Uh-huh.
And he was right. On just about every level, it was a little job that couldn't be beat.
Uh-huh.
I had friends of mine that were at big law firms making 5, 6, 7, 8 times as much money as I made when I started, who were absolutely miserable.
Uh-huh.
And that's not what I wanted to do. I wanted to do something that was going to have an impact, and I wanted to do something that was going to be that I was going to enjoy, at least enjoy for a little bit of it.
It's sort of an exciting job, right? You get to do not just the law part, but the investigation part of it gets pretty interesting too.
Well, once you start out in the DA's office, you're in criminal court, and there are literally, even today, there are probably between 70 and 80,000 filings and misdemeanor filings in criminal court. When I started, it was between 120,000 and 140,000 filings in criminal court just in Manhattan alone. So you're thrown into the fire in Manhattan criminal court. Your caseload can get up to 120 or 130 cases at a time.
Wow.
And, what you don't expect when you start at that job.
I had a caseload like that. Except I was in the detective squad.
Open cases. That's what it is.
Yeah. And you didn't expect to be so inundated where, all you could do was process things.
So why weren't you miserable? And it sounds like you're working a lot of hours, almost as many hours as the people that are working in these big law firms. Why weren't you miserable?
Because I thought I was having a difference. I guess the best way to explain it is that going into a job like that, you're dealing a lot with the public, and you really do feel like even though in your first year and a half, 2 years, you're just a clerk processing misdemeanor cases. You're learning a lot, and you're getting ready to move up, where you do and you can and often do make a difference. Even low-level felonies. You're dealing with the public constantly. You're dealing with civilians. You're dealing with obviously a lot of police witnesses. And what I didn't want to do was sit in some back office and process paper. Although for the first 18 months in the DA's office, that's what I felt like I was doing, was processing paper, as opposed to prosecuting criminals. But once you get up into Supreme Court, once you get promoted and you work your way up, it becomes and was and probably if I was still there, would still be a rewarding job.
One of the things that I remember talking to ADAs about all the time is how valuable the court experience is, and how not only is it valuable, it's valuable because once you get that under your belt and you're not nervous to be in front of a court, in front of a jury, then you can use that experience and cash in on it afterwards. And that's what a lot of people do, right?
Well, Yeah, a lot of people do cash in on it. I wish I was cashing in on it a little bit more. I wish I had my clients, instead of saying, listen, okay, you're going to charge me X, I can only pay half up front, and then I never see the other half. But the experience was unbelievable. If you want, you can try as many cases as you want. You can take as many pleas as you want. You were taught to exercise judgment. You were taught how to evaluate a case, what value to put on a case. You were taught critical skills about evaluating witness testimony and evaluating police testimony as well. And I was lucky enough to have moved up fairly quickly from criminal court to felony prosecutions, and after just short of 4 years, homicide prosecutions, that I got a lot of experience very quickly. I tried my first murder case just over 4 years in the office.
Wow, that's fast.
That's very fast. Now, if you're in the Manhattan DA's office, you'll be lucky to try a murder case after 10 years.
But there were also 600 murders in Manhattan back then per year, right?
Well, when you're on homicide squad, when you're on homicide call,
right.
And you're supposed to be on homicide call for 24 hours, the 24 hours was usually more like between 48 and 72, because bodies were hitting the street like flies, and arrests were being made. And back when I started on homicide call, the DA's office often wasn't involved in an investigation prior to an arrest. So basically, we were really reactive. We reacted to a situation instead of being involved in it. As I grew up on homicide call and got more experience, I tried to get involved in investigations early.
So you'd go out to the scene?
We would go to precincts. We'd go to scenes on a number of big cases that I had that had happened right away, that arrests were made right away. I was on the scene within hours. There's one case from January of 1993, a bank robbery in the 24th Precinct on the Upper West Side. I was actually listening to a radio broadcast coming from the scene. The bank robbery happened at 10. At 10:20, there was a blazing shootout on 93rd and Upper Riverside. And within 15 minutes of that shootout, I was listening to a report of the bank robbery on the radio in my office.
Dan, just to stop you for 1 second, that was my precinct, and I happened to be on vacation. I was like, I missed all the action.
It was your lucky day. I'm telling you.
I guess.
I was actually in the precinct by noon on that case, and George Pagan, who was a great guy, great boss,
lieutenant. Yeah.
He was standing at the door to his office with half a dozen white shirts, encircling him.
I think he just retired now, didn't he?
No, he retired a while ago. I heard he's up there in age.
Okay.
Yeah.
George looks. I knew George. And he looks at me, and he looks at his office, and he politely tries to excuse himself from the encircling horde of bosses. And I follow him into his office, shut the door, and he's talking to me all of 2 seconds. The door opens and all the white shirts come piling in.
That's just what you want, right?
And that's exactly what I want.
Yeah.
White shirts taking notes.
For our audience, white shirts are anyone above the rank of captain back then. Now, actually, even lieutenants wear white shirts.
Lieutenants are wearing white shirts.
But back then, it was, he's referring to all the deputy inspectors, chiefs, who really are looking at the political ramifications of a case like this and not the actual investigation, because they have no clue about the investigation.
So where was I going with that?
Well, you were talking. You were in the office with George Pagan, and all the white shirts came busting in.
All the white shirts come busting in, and I begged each of them. I said, "Don't take out a pen and don't take out a piece of paper, because I just need to talk to George for 10 minutes to find out what's going on." And that was a wild case that started with a bank robbery on 91st and Broadway,
right,
and ended with a wild shootout.
It was chase. It was a chase.
There was a chase up on. Over to West End, up West End, down 93rd to Upper Riverside, where there was a final shootout. And don't take this the wrong way, but amazingly, I believe, I don't remember the number, but I think there were 16 shots fired by police at the final shootout, and they hit the guy 12 times.
Oh, that's pretty good.
No, that's I can't believe how many other police shootings I responded to.
I thought you were going to say
30
for
rounds.
16.
Where 30 rounds were fired, and one, guy got hit once. So the bad guy.
They were 0 for 16.
They were pretty damn close to him, though, too, right?
Oh, they were very close to him. They were within 4 or 5 feet of him.
1 foot on top of him.
I can even hit the target, and I'm not a great shot. From 4 or 5 feet, I'm deadly.
I'm not a good shot either, believe me.
So, what was the outcome of this case?
Well, two guys. One guy got away.
Well, you went up there early, so that
Yeah, I was there within an hour, within 2.5
That helps
hours of
you.
the shooting.
That helps you with the case,
It certainly helps because you know what's going on. There's 2 guys already in custody that were arrested behind the bank in an alleyway as a result of some civilian 911 calls. The cops get into the alleyway and they arrest 2 of the guys. One guy gets away. We end up getting him for another bank robbery later. But
Where were these guys from?
the Bronx.
Oh, Bronx guys.
And they had, the Joint Bank Robbery Task Force had these guys doing, up to that point, 10. I think this was their 11th.
But these guys were loaded for bear, too, right? They weren't not considering getting caught.
These were not note-passing guys.
Right.
These were thoroughly bad guys. They were
this is
always
more,
armed.
not, like you said, not one person walking in with a note.
No.
This is like the plan. They made a plan. There's like 3 or 4 people involved in this, right?
In each of the 11, there were at least 2 guys involved, and it depended on the bank and the size of the bank. The bank on 91st and Broadway is fairly sizable. It took up about 2/3 of the block, and there were entrances on both, the north and south sides of the bank, and they had 2 guys dressed in construction regalia with hard hats and reflective vests, and then they had 2 guys dressed as they had all blue on, with security hats, with security baseball hats with a patch on it said security. And the 2 guys in the construction gear jumped the bandit barrier. The bandit barrier didn't go all up to the ceiling. There was about 2 feet below the ceiling that the bandit barrier ended. They actually vaulted themselves over the bandit barrier.
Wow.
Behind the
It's
bandit
pretty
barrier.
athletic, isn't it?
And
You couldn't do that.
I couldn't do that.
Me neither. You with the hip, me with my knees, forget it.
Oh, no.
We caught in 2 seconds.
No, I'd be dead in a heartbeat. I'd have fallen off the top of the bandit barrier and broken my neck. But yeah, they basically took over the bank. There were the 2 guys with security guards. One was at the north door, one was at the south door.
It's like a movie.
There was probably 15 to 20 people in the bank at the time. All of them were armed. All of them had 9s. 9mm. Both of the security guys, one of the security guys and one of the bandit barrier jumpers were caught in the alleyway. The other security guy got away, and the other bandit barrier jumper was the guy who ended up getting killed on 93rd and Upper Riverside.
So he was running in the street.
Running in the street.
Where was the car?
Firing in the street.
Didn't
Stacks fell asleep in the getaway car
guy
again.
pull up to the bank and exchange gunfire right in front of the bank?
No, it wasn't a scooter. I'll tell you the story about the scooter girl later.
All right.
There was a radio car between 90th and 91st coming up Broadway, and someone who was standing outside the bank, actually about to enter the bank, ran up to the radio car and told the 2 cops that there was a robbery going on, and they immediately stopped the radio car short of the
They
intersection.
didn't say I'm on meal.
I bet they wish they did, based on what happened. But they got out of the car and they approached the south door, and they could see. They couldn't actually see the guy standing inside the door, but they could see 2 guys behind the bandit barrier collecting money, and they could see people laying on the floor. And maybe 10 seconds after they arrived at the south door, the guy who was guarding the south door bursts out of the door and exchanges gunfire probably within 6 to 7 feet with one of the cops.
Wow.
Yeah, I've heard about this story
And
before.
they both missed. He goes on the run. They then put over the chase, and the chase is now on. Everybody is going. Nobody's responding to the bank at this point because they're all responding to the shooting.
Right.
And this guy runs west and then north on West End, and occasionally just turning and firing at the police as he goes. He then turns west on 93rd Street, and transit guys join in the chase. 2O guys are coming up Riverside Drive from the 20th Precinct. There are probably every sector car in the 2-4 was involved in this. And as they get closer to Riverside, Upper Riverside, cops start bailing out of the cars to try and get a stop on them, to try and get the guy to stop. And he just turns and fires. And crazily enough, there was a transit guy on the building line who decides that he's got to make it into the street. And as the transit guy goes from the building line to the street, the guy turns around, shoots, and hits. This is from 3/4 of the block down. Hits the transit guy square in the chest, in the vest. The transit guy goes down. He runs into the street. His sergeant was already in the street, and they then begin the chase. And the 20th Precinct guys were coming up Riverside Drive, so they know that they're going to be able to put a stop on this guy. He's not going to be able to get by them, or if he does, he's going to go into the park. And he ends up taking a hostage and begins to attempts to negotiate his surrender. At one point, he releases the hostage. She begins to fall, and all hell breaks loose. He's again shot multiple times and goes down. And unfortunately, one of the police rounds went through him and into the hostage, and unfortunately she passed away.
Well, I didn't know that's what happened. And what's his name? Patty White got struck in the foot, right?
Patty White got shot.
Officer, yeah.
Patty White got shot in the foot. As I said, Ron Bauman was a transit guy who got shot in the chest. All told...
Did he get off the job after that? The guy from transit that got shot in the chest?
No.
He stayed on the job, because that's a scary thing, getting shot. Even though you live, it's still a scary thing to live with.
And
right?
the pictures of the bruise to his chest, it probably was 6 to 8 inches around.
Wow.
Crime scene was at the hospital taking pictures of him, vouchering his vest around. What I always found unbelievable was the guy's gun. When I get the ballistics back, and the ballistics guy whose name escapes me was a friend of mine, he tells me, he goes, "Dan, that was an unbelievable shot." I go, "Why?" He goes, "The barrel was drilled. There's no rifling in that gun."
In the perp's gun.
Yeah. There was no rifling. He hit a cop square in the chest from probably, that's got to be at least 150 to 200 yards.
Wow.
Turning and firing, and hit him square in the chest with a gun that had no rifling. It was an unbelievable shot.
It's incredible.
And thank God Ron Bauman, he was fine.
Yeah.
It took him a while. The first time I talked to him a couple weeks later, he was still having trouble breathing. He was still on limited. He was on limited duty. He was back, but on limited duty. He was still having trouble breathing from the bruise.
Well, that could break your sternum. I mean, right?
It could. It hit him lower left chest. But that was just an unbelievable shot. But two of those guys, the two guys got caught, went to trial, 3-month trial, convicted after trial.
Why should it take 3 months for a trial like this? When I know there's a lot of moving pieces, but
84 witnesses.
Wow. Was the FBI involved in this too?
Yes. Well, JTTF was involved.
So all guys, yeah. At least
JTTF processed the inside of the bank, and crime scene did all the outside work. And of course, the two guys who ran into the alley behind the bank, they ditched all their clothes, and so there was actual crime scene. And one guy had climbed over a fence, and there was razor wire on top, and had cut himself. So they're taking blood from they're processing crime scenes everywhere.
Right.
And the The perp who was killed ended up firing, I think, all 15 rounds that he had. And
Wow.
it was...
Now with Cuomo banning those large magazines.
As a matter of fact, that's a funny story because New Jersey, I'm back in Jersey, and New Jersey just banned my magazines, and I had to send them to a friend in I had to send all my 15-round mags to a friend in North Carolina. I sent them with a note. Please babysit these.
Yeah, till the laws changed.
Yeah. So I had 3 15-round mags for my Glock, and I went out and bought 5 10-rounds. So I increased my capacity by 5 rounds.
Hey, you mentioned something earlier about the when you were in law school, right? And the basketball games that you used to play in. No, it was when you graduated. DA's office.
DA's office.
The basketball games that you used to play, and it gave me I had a vision of A Few Good Men. Remember that scene? Because you mentioned them having a beer afterwards, and there's the scene there with Tom Cruise, and then he's playing, and he's in the middle of the game, and then they go after who was the other guy? Kevin Bacon.
Kevin Bacon, right?
And they go back, and they're having a beer after the softball game, and then they have those words, and you suck at the softball, remember? And he walks out. So they go from being on the field exactly the way you said it. It's having a beer, but you're saying Cuomo didn't show up for those beers.
No, never.
Why? He sucked at basketball? He didn't want to associate with you guys?
Didn't want to buy a round.
that may be true. No, actually, Andy was a pretty good ball player, but he was in appeals, and the appellate guys were the eggheads. Those are the real smart guys. And
why are they the smarter guys?
Yeah, because they want to do the research. I didn't want to do research. I wanted to try cases. That's why I went to the DA's office. Andy, I think, just went to the DA's office to get, to put it on a resume because he knew he was always going to work for his father. And
didn't John F. Kennedy Jr. work in the DA's office too?
Bobby Kennedy Jr. worked in the DA's office.
John Kennedy never passed the bar.
No, he did. He worked in the DA's office too.
I started with Bobby Kennedy Jr. and worked.
Not Bobby. I'm talking about John.
No. Yeah. They both did. That was his cousin.
I worked initially from 82 to 96 in Trial Bureau 50, and Bobby started with me in 82. He worked in Trial Bureau 50, and then John started. I can't remember exactly the year. It was 90, 91, 92, and he was in Trial Bureau 50 as well with me for a couple of years. John's a very nice guy, good guy. Bobby was a very nice guy, good guy.
It's an interesting place to work, man. Especially with it has it's so respected in the nation. You got so many TV shows based on it. So you got to feel like a superstar.
But it is a
walking around
contract in some ways, though, right? I mean, you weren't getting in the Manhattan DA's office.
I didn't know anyone.
You didn't, maybe, but a lot of people, I bet, do.
Yeah, but don't forget, he went to the
Seton Hall, went to the Harvard of New Jersey.
The Harvard of New Jersey.
No, but I'm just saying, I'm not saying you were hooked, but I'm sure plenty of people are hooked that go to the Manhattan DA's office.
Let's see, Irv Gottbaum Jr., whose father was president of the teachers union, I believe. There were a couple of other contracts besides Bobby in my ear. I don't remember them off the top of my head.
I remember we used to get these young DAs. They'd grab the complainant and you'd be like, "Oh, why are you carrying a knife?" Like, "Hey, Susie, the guy lives in Spanish Harlem. If you don't carry at least a knife, you are dead," right? Like, she was baffled, like, why he was carrying a knife.
Let me ask you a question. What made you want to go into the DA squad?
The DA's office was something that was not on my radar. I was.
And then what happened?
Well, in middle law school, I met a girl by the name of Diane Sammons, and I had
just the name sounds hot.
She was hot, and I wanted to get close to her, and we ended up becoming friends. And of course, to my distress, I learned swiftly that she was happily married. But we still got to be friends. And she went to the Manhattan DA's office. She graduated in 81 and went to the DA's office. And we kept in touch. She told me how much fun she was having and that I should consider going there. And it was a party sometime in November of 81.
What were you doing before this? Where were you working as a lawyer before that?
I went to the DA's office right out of law school.
Okay. So she's giving you this advice right before you graduate?
Right. This is November, December of 1981 at a party in Maplewood, New Jersey. and she is regaling me and others with the story of a jury trial that she had just finished.
So these are DA war stories.
Right. And everybody in the room is either out from 1981, class of 1981, or class of 1982. The people in the class of 1981, they were all looking at her, with crossed eyes, thinking, how are you getting a jury trial? You've been out of law school since May. Mm-hmm. You just tried a jury trial? How is that possible? And of course, all of these guys got milquetoast skin because, they've all been working at big firms and they've never seen, they won't see the inside of a courtroom for another 10 years. And Diane just had a jury trial, and she's talking about how exciting it was and how great it was. And I thought, man, I got to do this.
Check this out.
And it wouldn't be bad to follow her around, But it was, that story. No, it couldn't have been. It couldn't have been that late because I got the offer. I got the offer for the job. It's probably October, and I hadn't even sent them a resume. And I think the next day, I sent a resume, and I got an interview.
Did you finish at the top of your class in
the Harvard of New Jersey?
Seton Hall Catholic School?
Top 10%. I wouldn't say it was the top of my class. Last year, I let my grades slide a little bit because I was tending bar. Keep in mind, while I was at the Harvard of New Jersey, I had to work.
You still had to pay for it, though.
I had to pay for it, and loans only paid for so much. My parents had already paid for college, so I got out of college almost debt-free, and, I needed to work.
Where did you go undergrad?
I have a bachelor's and a master's from Villanova.
Wow, you went to some good schools.
Well, as we used to refer to it
the
as
Harvard of Pennsylvania, too, right?
as we used to refer to it as Villanowhere, or Vanilla Nova.
Dan, you were a heavy-duty Catholic, man. 2 Catholic schools, Villanova, and then...
Wait, I went to grammar school, Essex Catholic High School in Newark for 2 years, and then I transferred to Verona High School I grew up in Verona for 2 years. So every year of my educational was in Catholic school.
You had some indoctrination there, man.
I rebelled against that quite a bit at Villanova. Yeah. Long hair, big beard.
How long did it take for you to get your first jury trial?
I think I got my first jury trial, and it probably wasn't until January, February.
So it was a fast track for you as well.
Yeah, well, if you wanted to, keep in mind that when you're in criminal court, you're processing hundreds and hundreds of cases. And very difficult to get a jury trial in criminal court. 1% of misdemeanors prosecuted probably less than 1% of misdemeanors prosecuted back in 82 and 83 went to a jury trial. And if you got one, you were lucky. Mm-hmm. And if you got one, there was always somebody there sitting in a boss sitting in the audience, giving you advice when the jury's out of the room. But I remember my first jury trial. It was a jostling pickpocket. And after I picked a jury, there's no way I could lose this case. Mm-hmm. Because I got 6 women on a jury, all of whom had been pickpocket victims. I couldn't believe it. How did this happen? How did the defense attorney leave these 6 women on a jury? And my case was 2 cops and a complainant who had absolutely no idea what was happening at the time. And the jury acquitted in like 2 hours.
Holy shit.
And I walked out of the room stunned. And the defense attorney, who I like to this day, a guy from Legal Aid by the name of Tom Klein, good guy, great lawyer. To this day, I don't know what happened because, as a prosecutor, the office had a blanket policy is you do not talk to jurors, either acquitting or convicting. Of course, I ignored that oftentimes as I went on in my career, but I walked out of that courtroom absolutely stunned. And I got back to the office, and I sit down with my deputy bureau chief, who tells me what I did and didn't do wrong. And then I just looked at him. I said, "Rick, what happened in there?" He goes, "Man, it's just Manhattan jurors." I said, "Yeah, but all those women have been victims of pickpockets." He goes, "Yeah, but all those women jurors were teachers and social workers."
Oh God.
So, you got to look who you're picking. And I was like, yeah, but as soon as they thought they came out with the word, I've been a victim of a pickpocket. Oh, I got this in the bag.
Yeah.
They didn't want to put someone in jail then, right?
In hindsight, if you
And the guy had 30 prior arrests for pickpocketing. 30, all in the subway.
Wow. That MO was a strong thing.
It's a funny thing because if you would have got 6 guys on that jury, none of them got pickpocket. What are they thinking about? What would happen if my mother got pickpocket?
Exactly.
My sister got pickpocket.
Exactly. Well, I learned a jury selection lesson during that trial. Just because people have had the same experience as your putative victim here doesn't mean that they're going to sympathize or do anything about it.
Where did you live when you worked in the DA squad? Were you living in Manhattan?
I lived on the Upper West Side for a while. I lived in
This is a nice life you got for yourself. No, really. You're a young guy. You're living on the Upper West Side. You work in the district attorney's office. You jump on the train. You go downtown. You handle your cases, your business. You're 6'6".
You go to Pete's for beers after playing basketball.
Right? You're in the DA basketball league. You know?
What's the name of the bar on 79th Street, right off of Broadway? Irish
Oh,
place.
yeah, the Dublin pub.
Dublin House.
Yeah, Dublin House. Yeah.
That was a great
That's
spot.
where the kid got killed in front of him. He got kicked in the head.
Yeah. Well, it was
Did you have a little fun back then?
minor fun. Minor fun.
Was alcohol always involved in your fun? Most of my fun stories involve alcohol.
Yeah, the ones I can remember. Yes. But
I see a TV series here.
There's a good story about the Dublin House. I was in the office about 3 years, and there was an assault case where the victim was an FOB.
A funky outrageous brother?
No, the victim was an FOB, or the son of an FOB. An FOB was a friend of Bob. A friend of Bob Morgenthau.
Yeah.
So he's sitting on a bus, and a little guy comes on a bus, and he sits down, and the victim is sitting next to an open window, and the defendant, the soon-to-be defendant, was yelling at the victim to close the window. It was cold, and the victim doesn't close the window. He gets up and goes over and saps him in the nose and breaks his nose. So because it was an FOB, they wanted somebody with experience who'd been there a while. I think I'd probably been there 4 years. And I get the case, and we go to trial. And in the middle of trial, the defendant tries to assault his lawyer.
Oh,
the jurors are looking, going, wow, this is an assault case? And the guy just tried to sucker punch his lawyer. And the court officers are now wrestling on the floor with Richard Friedlander, who has a broken leg. And the judge looks at me, he goes, Mr. Bibb, would you show the jury out? So I show the jury out while they're wrestling. And Richard Friedlander was about 5'5", 130 pounds. Mm-hmm. There's 4 court officers on top of him, having trouble getting them cuffed. They cuff him up.
This guy had a bad temper, huh?
Oh, bad temper. They cuff him up. I expect him to go to jail that night. We continue with the trial. He calms down. He discharges his
Didn't
attorney.
you say he broke his leg?
No, not then. He had a broken leg. His leg was in a cast.
Oh, all right.
And so the judge lets him continue as his own lawyer and has the victim on the stand for, this should have been a 1-day trial, 2-day trial. Pick a jury, put the evidence on, sum up the next day. Turned into a week-long nightmare where the defendant is cross-examining all the witnesses. There were 2 eyewitnesses on the bus. The defendant walked off the bus into the arms of an off-duty transit cop. This should have been a couple, 2 days, 5-6 days in. And the last day we're supposed to go to the jury. The defendant's supposed to sum up. I'm supposed to sum up. The defendant calls and says, I'm not coming. And the judge looks at me and goes, the judge, brand new judge too, brand spanking new judge, looks at me and goes, what do I do?
Oh my God.
And I go, well, you gave him the warnings that said if he didn't show up, we're going to go forward without him. So we should go forward. Now, the lawyer he tried to assault is now his standby legal counsel. He refuses to sum up, so I sum up. The jury sends a note out, says, if we think he's crazy, what do we do? So the judge then instructs the jury, that's a defense he's got to raise, and he didn't. So they swiftly convict him. And it's about 9 months later, after a softball game, I'm with my girlfriend in the Dublin house. And sitting there's probably half a dozen of us from the softball team, my girlfriend, and the other 4 or 5 guys from the softball team slowly filter out. And then we're sitting at a table, there's little booths along the right-hand side of the wall. We're sitting at one of those booths, and I look over, and there's Richard Friedlander sitting.
Mm-hmm. Did he tell you to close the window?
Buy you a drink?
So I looked at my girlfriend. I said, I can't believe that. I can't believe this. She goes, what? What's the story? I go, I have to make a 911. I got to call 911. So, this is 1986. I walk to the back of the bar. There's 2 phone booths. Step in the phone booth. I get the usually exceedingly intelligent 911 operator on with me. And I try to explain to her what's happening. And she's like, where are you?
Oh, good.
It's the really brilliant people they have on 911. And I finally explain to her that there's a guy on a warrant, that the police are going to want to come, and that they should. So I tell my girlfriend, I just wait right there. And I go out and I wait for the arrival of the police. And a sergeant and his driver show up, and it turns out I know the driver. I'd had half a dozen beers by that point, at least. And I go and explain to the sergeant what's going on. And he's like, are you drunk?
Oh, good.
I look at him, I said, yeah. I said, but I can still see. And I said, the guy in the bar is a guy that I tried for an assault who was convicted after trial, and he's out on a warrant. How do you know? Well, if he wasn't out on a warrant, I would have found out about it when they returned him to court. So the sergeant says, and I said, oh, by the way, you should bring a couple extra guys with you. So the sergeant goes, well, all right, really officious guy says, okay, we will take your word for it. We'll go in. So they go into the bar, and I said, just be prepared. The bartender was a guy by the name of Chris. I can't believe I remember these details. Bartender I had known from drinking there, a guy by the name of Chris. I walk in, followed by a sergeant and 3 cops. And he's like, what's going on? I just, put my fingers across my lips, don't say anything. By this time, it's 3 deep at the bar. And I walk up behind Richard Friedlander, and I go like this. And I point my finger at him. And the sergeant walks up to him and says, are you Richard Friedlander? He said, yes, I am. And the sergeant says, well, you're under arrest. Well, guess what happened next?
He throws a punch at the sergeant.
4 cops and Richard Friedlander are rolling around on the floor.
This guy loves to fight, man.
As people are fleeing, going out the front door and running toward the back. And I take 2 steps back, and I look and I go, I told you so. And they finally get him cuffed up. And they pick him up and they take him outside. And the sergeant comes over to me and goes, well, you got to come to the precinct. I said, I got no problem with that. And I look at my girlfriend. I said, let's get in the back of a radio car. I mean, even though the precinct was like 4 blocks away.
It's 82nd Street. Yeah.
So we get in the back of a radio car and we go to the precinct. And I had a full beard when I was trying him, and I was pretty much clean shaven when this was happening. So I'm sitting outside the cells on the first floor of the 2-0, and Friedlander is going nuts in the cell, screaming, yelling. And finally he looks over at me and he goes, do I know you? I go, yes, you do, Richard. He goes, who are you? And I said, well, I'm the prosecutor who tried you for that assault case. He goes, I beat that case. I said, no, you ran away from that case. So I'm not having a conversation with my defendant. So I write this long, and of course they do a warrant check, and it comes back. He's got the warrant. And I write this long note for the cop the guy's going to go right to court and at night arraignments. And I write this long note for the cop to give the assistant DA. And the assistant DA reads the note to the judge. Guy gets remanded. The next day we're in court, and he's looking at me going, now I recognize you. As the judge is like, well, we got to get his lawyer here. And I said, well, you remember, he was his own lawyer, Judge. You can do whatever you want with him.
Yeah, but he said that he canceled the case. That he dismissed the case.
He beat the case.
If he's the lawyer, can't he do that?
Yeah.
Just say, I won.
I won. I think that's what he probably told himself.
He declared that he won that case.
But I remember, the court officer coming out after he had called and said he wasn't coming, and I'm like, okay, that's a first. Mm-hmm. And I'm sitting in the bar looking at Friedlander, going, "Can you believe this?"
I got to remember to do that.
And the
he should have canceled the warrant on himself.
Yeah, he could have. You're right. Yeah, should have did that
over the phone. Yeah, my clients.
Yeah, this is Attorney Friedlander. I'd like to.
I'm representing Friedlander. The case of Friedlander. Oh, that's a great story, man.
That was insane.
Oh my God,
Dan.
True every word.
One of the cases, and I don't know if you were the lead attorney in this case or not, but the case of the doctor who killed his wife and then allegedly threw her in his plane, flew over the Atlantic and dumped her in the ocean. Was that your case?
It was. I tried the case. Steve Sirocco and I, in 1996, started the Cold Case Unit in the Manhattan DA's office. And we were taken off a homicide call. We were allowed to take cases as we wanted them. And we were basically allowed to take cases by application. In other words, detectives would come to us and ask us, I have this old case. You guys want to work on it? And if we knew and liked the guy, the answer was always yes. If we thought the detective bringing the case to us was, a dick, the answer might be no.
How do they become a dick?
How does a detective become a dick? Think they're legally smarter than you are?
That happens a lot.
Sometimes it has. There were a few that if I mentioned now,
I probably know their names.
You would know. You absolutely would know their names.
Well, you know who I want to bring up, and I love the guy, but I had more fights with him in my career as a sergeant than any other human being on this earth. Is Joe LaTrenta. Joe LaTrenta. I love the guy, but if I said something was red, he said it was blue. If it was green, he said it was white. He was the most. Mm-hmm. But he was a great detective. But he just had that personality that
Well, get back to talk about the doctor a bit, and then I'll tell you.
Tell me a Joe the Lip story.
I'll tell you a lip story. So we had just done a 27-year-old double homicide from Midtown North.
Cold case.
It was 1970 double homicide. And Midtown North Squad had closed it on an EC that the guy was dead, even though they never had a body. But they figured he was such a bad guy, he couldn't spend 27 years of his life without getting arrested. Because up to the time of the double homicide, he probably spent 50% of his life in state prison.
That makes sense.
But he was alive. And he was for 27 years. 26 of the 27 years, he was living in Benicia, California, under an assumed name.
Was he getting in trouble under that name?
No. Never took a collar again.
Wow.
So we did that case, and there was Andy Rosenzweig was the chief investigator. He was retired NYPD, went to the DA's office as an investigator, ended up becoming chief. He brought us that case. We did that case. He ends up getting collared back in New York with a gun. He said he came back to New York to kill cops. But
the Benicia guy?
Yeah. So he pleads, and Andy Rosenzweig came to us with the doctor case. And we said, sure, we'll take a look at it. It took 2 years before that was.
What happened with the doctor case?
That was September 97 when Andy brought it to us, and he was arrested in September of 99 for the murder of his wife.
But wasn't the family pushing, though, that they felt he killed her?
Well, yes. Originally, the family absolutely believed that he had killed her, and they pushed that narrative. There were two really good missing persons guys assigned to it. One of them whom I'm still in touch with, I'm blanking on his name. There was one guy from the 19th, one guy from missing persons that were assigned to the case. Both really good guys, both really good detectives. And it was that was 85 when his wife disappeared. And they pretty much ran out of steam by 1990. There was pretty much nothing left to do. The defendant, Robert Birnbaum, had moved to Las Vegas, and then to Minot, North Dakota.
Now, he was a plastic surgeon.
He was a plastic surgeon.
So he made some coin, this guy.
What, did he kill his wife?
Yeah.
Yeah. And we ended up trying that case in September and October of 2000. And, it was about a 7-week trial. The jury was out for a total of probably about 6 or 7 hours overnight, and convicted him probably about 4 hours one night and then 3 hours the next morning, and convicted him of murder too. He got 20 to life, and he's in his 18th year.
Was that the first case in New York State history, murder case conviction without a body?
Yeah, we researched that, and the answer to that is no.
Oh, it wasn't. Okay.
Because at the time we were prosecuting the doctor, there were 3 other no-body homicides pending.
Wow.
That were tried there had never been a no-body homicide tried in Manhattan. We didn't check any of the other boroughs, but there had never been a no-body homicide as far back as records were kept in Manhattan. And the Sante Kimes case was pending at the time.
Right.
The grifter mother and father.
Also from the 19th precinct, mother and son. Yeah.
Mother and son team.
Yeah, I remember them. That was a good case.
What was the lady's name? They killed Rubenstein or something. Silverstein. Silverstein. Yeah.
Silverstein. There were 2 other cases that got absolutely no press because they weren't a doctor killing his wife,
right?
An Upper East Side doctor killing his wife, an Upper East Side, a grifter couple killing an Upper East Side socialite. They were, another guy of a guy who killed and strangled his wife, who was overcome with guilt and went in and confessed to having killed her. A good friend of mine, Harvey Rosen, tried that case. There was another no-body homicide that an assistant DA by the name of Gene Hurley, who, by the way, is still started in '83, a year after I did, and is still at the DA's office.
The master of preparation, they used to call him, right?
There was no stone left unturned
right.
with Gene Hurley.
He was unbelievable. Small guy. Someone told me, Andy Curtin told me one time, when he interviewed for the DA's office, they said, on a scale of 1 to 10, what would you say your sense of humor is? And he looks at him and he says, about a 3. I thought that was great.
I know. I started with Andy. I interviewed that day with Andy. The day before, we were both at we had interviewed together at the Brooklyn DA's office, and then the day that we both interviewed at Manhattan DA's office.
Yeah. I was just going to ask you that.
I would agree that with Andy's assessment of his
that's
funny
what
quotient.
Gene Hurley said. He said his was about a 3.
Oh, I'd agree with Andy. Probably a 3 too. But Gino. Good friend of mine, absolutely a 3, maybe less.
Maybe less.
I was going to ask you that because obviously Manhattan DA squads is a prestigious place to go, but did you try and get into other DA squads?
I did. I interviewed in Brooklyn, and I was offered a job on a Wednesday. And Gold was the sitting DA, but Holtzman was doing all the interviews because she was taking over in January of '83. I got an offer from her on a Wednesday, and I said, well, can I, or I think it was Tuesday, and I said, well, can I let you know on Friday? And on Thursday, I had 4 separate interviews in the Manhattan DA's office, and I told them I have other job offers, and I got to make a decision. And I was there all day. I ended up seeing the boss late that afternoon. And he said, well, I want to call Judge Meaner and Judge Stern, Herb Stern, who was a former Manhattan assistant DA under Hogan, who's now a federal judge out in Newark. He goes, I just want to call them and ask about you. And I said, okay. He goes, call tomorrow about noon. So I'm in some lawyer's office doing some work. And I call at noon, and I get Morgenthau on the phone. He goes, oh, well, Dan, would like to make you an offer. I said, well, I'd like to accept. So, yeah, and I interviewed in the Bronx DA's office.
So you became an FOB.
From the Bob.
that day, during that phone call, I became an FOB.
How did that guy, Linklater, what was his name? How was he a friend of Bob's?
I don't. The defendant. No,
the complainant
The
was.
complainant.
Oh, the complainant.
The complainant.
Oh, that's why you had to
I
take it
think
seriously. That's why
the complainant's father was a friend of Morgenthau.
Mm-hmm.
That was not the only FOB case that I had. I had another crazy case where a guy was calling 911 and sending cops and fire gallivanting over to his old girlfriend's apartment. So I'm about 5 or 6 years in the office when I get that, and that girl's father was a friend of Bob. So the FOB cases that were, not homicides or, they got assigned to experienced people.
Of course they did.
They Bob Morgenthau wanted somebody on the case that knew what they were doing because
they were FOBs.
They're FOBs.
Sure. All right, we're going to hear some more stories, more great stories on the second half. You ready? We're going to take a break. This is what we do here. We refresh our cups. You didn't have any tea, though.
He doesn't drink tea or coffee. I learned that.
What is this?
It's water.
Was that vodka?
I'm un-American.
It's the Manhattan DA squad vodka right here.
He's an FOB.
Don't laugh.
We'll be back for this part 2 of Police Off the Cuff with Dan Bibb.